Welcome everyone to By Jash channel, back again for another deep dive. Y'all want to take a closer look at the Siege of Khartoum, using Wilbur Smith's The Triumph of the Sun, and wow, this historical episode is going to be intense.
Yeah, it really captures a specific moment in history, 1880s Sudan, where colonialism and religious fervor and personal ambition, they all kind of collide in this dramatic fashion.
Almost like a powder keg ready to explode, right?
Yeah.
You have a region under Egyptian rule, but they're yearning for independence, and then right into that already tense situation walks the Mahdi, this super charismatic religious leader who just ignites a full-blown rebellion.
Yeah, and caught in the crosshairs of the British, they have to figure out this conflict, and it's no easy feat, let me tell you.
Oh, absolutely. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape.
Yeah.
And speaking of pieces, let's talk characters. It's their stories that really make this whole thing come alive. We've got Ryder Courtney, this British trader trapped in Khartoum, trying to protect his business and his life.
And his resourcefulness is amazing. Smuggling goods, managing this crazy menagerie of animals, bartering with General Gordon just to stay afloat. That says a lot about his ability to adapt and his survival instincts.
He's not backing down from a challenge, that's for sure. Then there's General Gordon, the British leader, defending Khartoum against impossible odds.
Gordon's portrayed as this mythical figure, stoic and strong. It's even with dwindling supplies and betrayals in his own ranks. His optimism even in those situations is inspiring, but also kind of tragic.
Yeah, embodies that classic British stiff upper lip, even when everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
The source material doesn't shy away from the tougher parts of his leadership, though, does it? His punishments could be pretty brutal.
Right. It shows how hard it was to be a leader in extreme circumstances. Gordon had to make tough choices to keep order, and the novel doesn't try to hide the consequences.
Adds this layer of moral ambiguity to him. Makes you wonder, do the ends justify the means? And in the middle of all this, we've got those classic human stories, love, and relationships happening as the siege goes on.
Those personal stories add emotional depth. You think about Rebecca, a young woman torn between her feelings for Ryder and the danger all around them.
Or Penrod Ballantyne, the British officer and spy, not only dealing with a dangerous landscape, but also juggling his own complex relationships. Really brings a human side to all this historical drama.
Exactly. Reminds us that even in huge historical events, people are still living their lives, falling in love, making hard choices based on their loyalties and desires.
Can't talk about the siege of Khartoum without talking about the rebellion's driving force, the Mahdi.
Right. He's shown as this charismatic and deeply religious figure, someone who inspires crazy devotion in his followers. But the novel also looks at the darker side of his rule, the public executions, the taking of concubines. It's a stark look at the reality under his leadership.
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. Leaders, even the ones who inspire revolutions, can have flaws and make choices that are morally iffy, especially during conflicts and upheaval.
Makes you think about power itself, how it corrupts even with good intentions, what compromises get made when you're chasing a goal.
Definitely questions worth thinking about. So we've got the scene, the characters, the tension. What happens next? What's it like for the people stuck in Khartoum as the siege tightens?
Imagine a city being slowly strangled. Food is scarce, cholera breaks out, desperation sets in. The novel paints a vivid picture of the hardship people went through. There's one scene where Rebecca and the other women are making green cake out of papyrus just to try and avoid starving.
Wow, that's incredible. Thinking outside the box, or outside the pantry, I guess you could say.
It shows how ingenious and resilient people can be when facing extreme hardship, but it also shows just how bad things were. Imagine eating papyrus to survive.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. And as things get worse, how does it end? Does Khartoum fall?
Sadly, it does. The dervish attack on the city is described in detail, the fighting, the defense, the fall. It's a brutal portrayal of the horrors of war.
And after the siege, what happens to the people of Khartoum? What happens to our characters?
The Mahdi's forces win, and the novel shows what happens to the captives in the Mahdi's rule. It's a time of celebration for the winners, but despair for those who lost everything. And for characters like Ryder Courtney, it becomes a desperate fight to stay alive.
So even when the siege ends, the story isn't over. It's like one chapter closes and a whole new one full of uncertainty and danger opens up.
Exactly. The siege might be over, but the fight for survival, for freedom, for some kind of normalcy in a world gone crazy, that continues.
Makes you wonder if anyone really comes out of a conflict like that unscathed. The physical wounds heal, but the emotional scars, the memories, they stay with you, shaping the lives of the people who live through it.
And that leads to a question, could the fall of Khartoum been avoided? Were there mistakes, miscalculations, or mischances that doomed the city?
That's a question that will guide our deep dive. We'll explore not just the events, but the choices, big and small, that led to this important moment in history.
And as we go deeper, we'll uncover not just the historical facts, but the human stories, the triumphs and tragedies that make the Siege of Khartoum so compelling even today.
Well, let's get into it.
Khartoum falling was a turning point for sure, but for our characters, things weren't over. While the Mahdi was taking control, Ryder Courtney pulled off a crazy escape.
Oh, it was incredible. Imagine navigating a steamboat full of people freaking out past dervish guns along the Nile.
Showed his courage and how fast he could think. He had to make decisions in seconds, not just for himself, but for everyone he was trying to save.
And don't forget, he made saving the Benbrook family a priority, including Rebecca. Really said something about him with all that pressure.
For sure. It shows loyalty and compassion going beyond just surviving himself. And that idea of loyalty, we see it with Penrod Ballantyne, too, and his relationship with Yaqub, his guide.
Oh, yeah. Their bond was more than just officer and subordinate. They needed each other to survive in that brutal desert.
Exactly. It's about human connection, even in the worst situations. They relied on each other's skills and instincts for the physical dangers and all the emotional stuff, too.
So interesting how this story keeps showing how important those connections are. Ryder's loyalty to the Benbrooks, Penrod, and Yaqub. These relationships are lifelines in all the chaos.
Totally. It makes the point that even in war, it's often the personal connections that keep us going, that give us strength.
Makes you realize history isn't just dates and battles. It's about individual stories of resilience, courage, and the bonds that hold people together.
And speaking of tough choices, almost every character faces them. Ryder with his escape, Gordon and his dwindling supplies, Rebecca and her feelings for Ryder and all the turmoil, they're all making impossible choices.
Makes you think, right? If you were them, what would you do? How would you weigh the risks when life or death is on the line?
That's what's so powerful about seeing history through personal stories. It makes us think about what we do in those situations.
So we talked about individual struggles, but what about the bigger clash of ideas behind it all? The different leadership of Gordon and the Mahdi.
Such a contrast. Gordon's the traditional Western military approach, discipline and belief in British reinforcements. Then you have the Mahdi, the populist spiritual resistance. His strength is religious zeal and his followers' passion.
Classic David and Goliath. He established power versus a charismatic leader who gets the people on his side.
And the Mahdi winning is even more important because of that. It's not just military, it's one way of thinking beating another.
It's about belief and wanting to control your own destiny. And while the book doesn't hide the bad stuff from both sides, it's important to remember the Mahdi's rule. Even though it was supposed to be about freedom, it was also harsh.
Very true. It reminds us that revolutions, even if they're for good reasons, often have their own problems. Power can corrupt no matter who has it.
It's a warning that we see over and over in history. But even with all the darkness, there are good things in this story too.
Definitely. Like when Penrod finds out the grain's being stolen and who solves the mystery. Rebecca and her sisters, they use papyrus to make green cake to feed people.
Such a great example of people being smart and kind when things are bad. Even with conflict and hardship, people help each other and find hope.
And those small acts of kindness mean even more because things are so bleak.
It shows that even in the worst times, people can survive and even thrive.
And sometimes there's even humor. Like when Penrod needs to bribe someone to find the thieves, Ryder tells him to double the reward because he knows Gordon hates spending money.
Little detail, but it tells you so much about them and how things worked back then.
Those small things make the story real. They remind us that even in crazy situations, people are still people with their own ways of doing things.
And speaking of navigating the world, Penrod's love life is as messy as the politics. He's got Rebecca, but then there's also Bakita, his Sudanese lover.
The love triangle. It makes Penrod's character even more interesting. He has feelings for both, and society and culture make it even harder.
Love and desire don't just disappear during war. They can get even stronger mixed up with the fight to survive and find meaning.
And as the Mahdi takes over Khartoum, our characters are scattered. Penrod's in the desert. Ryder sailed away with the Benbrooks. Uncertainty is everywhere.
Talk about a cliffhanger. And just when you think it can't get more complicated, there's a twist with the British relief column.
You mean the message Penrod sent to General Gordon with a pigeon about the column?
Exactly. But things happen, and the message doesn't get to Gordon in time. And when the column led by General Stewart finally gets close to Khartoum,
They find out the city has already fallen.
awful. It's like war is playing a cruel joke. Timing can be the difference between being saved and complete disaster.
And for those who are waiting to be rescued, like the Benbrook sisters, it's a nightmare. They're prisoners in the city they tried to escape.
It's heartbreaking. And it gets worse when we learn about the Mahdi taking concubines.
Yeah, that adds a scary element to the story. Both Rebecca and Amber are presented to him.
Terrifying. And what happens to their father, David?
He doesn't make it. He's captured, and the novel shows his death.
Feels like every bit of hope is gone. As the Mahdi's power grows, our characters are dealing with loss and facing impossible odds.
It's a big moment for everyone. Penrod doesn't know about the sisters. He's still in the desert. Ryder escapes, but feels guilty about leaving the Benbrooks.
All this uncertainty and doom sets us up for the last part of our deep dive. We'll see how our characters handle what happened and fight for their lives and the people they love in a world changed by war. I can't imagine what those characters are going through. They made it through the siege, but now they've got all these new problems inside and out. How do we even start with this?
Well, let's look at Penrod. He's still out in the desert, doesn't know anything about what happened to Rebecca and Amber. But fate has a way of, stepping in.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
What happens to Penrod?
Remember Osman Adelan, that tough dervish leader we talked about? Penrod ends up becoming his. It's not really a prisoner, but more like...
Like a friend he has to be careful around. That sounds super dangerous, but also really interesting.
Yeah. It is. It's complicated. Osman likes Penrod for some reason. Gives him important missions, trusts his advice. It's risky for both of them.
Like walking on a tightrope. One wrong move, one wrong word, and it's over.
Penrod's always thinking has to seem loyal to Osman while trying to find out about Rebecca and Amber. He's playing a dangerous game, hoping to use his spot to rescue them.
Behind enemy lines. It's like a spy movie. What about Ryder? Does he give up on the Benbrook sisters?
No way. Ryder never stops trying to find them. He ends up in Ethiopia and meets Emperor Johannes V, who, remember, is worried about the Mahdi's forces himself.
So they could team up. 2 birds, 1 stone.
Exactly.
Right.
Ryder sees this as a way to hit back at the Mahdi and maybe save the sisters. He uses what he knows about the Mahdist army, especially Osman's tactics, to warn the Emperor about the invasion.
It's wild how these separate stories start to connect all these alliances and reasons for doing things. But if Penrod's with Osman and Ryder's in Ethiopia, who tries to rescue the Benbrook sisters...
It ends up being both of them working together. Penrod uses his position with Osman to get info on the harem where they are and the security.
So he's the inside man giving them what they need to try to rescue.
Right. At the same time, Ryder, with the Emperor's help, starts planning a military attack to weaken the Mahdi's forces to give them a chance.
Espionage and military strategy. And both are super risky.
Oh, yeah. Penrod could be found out at any moment, and Ryder's facing a strong enemy. The Mahdi has more soldiers, and they really believe in what they're fighting for.
David versus Goliath again. But with all the planning, what about Rebecca and Amber? How are they handling being prisoners in the harem?
It's different for each of them. Rebecca's older and understands the danger, so she's scared. Wants to escape, worried about what might happen.
Must be awful, trapped with no way out. What about Amber?
Amber's younger, and at first she's surprisingly adaptable. She misses her family and life, but she's also kind of resilient and curious, so she finds ways to feel normal.
Even in a bad situation, people find ways to cope, to adjust, to see the good.
Exactly. Not saying it wasn't terrible, but showing how people react to trauma and hard times. And talking about hard times, the big moment is the raid on the harem planned by Penrod and Ryder.
Here we go. Do they save the Benbrook sisters?
It's intense. There are times it seems impossible, hope is almost gone. But with bravery, some clever thinking, and maybe some luck, Rebecca and Amber are back with Penrod and Ryder.
Oh, thank goodness. I was worried. But they're not safe yet, are they? Still in the middle of a war.
Nope. Getting out of the harem is just the start. They have to avoid the Mahdi soldiers, travel through rough areas, and even deal with problems and betrayals within their group.
Sounds like it never really ends. Always testing them. But do they make it out alive in the end?
The book ends with a mix of victory and sadness. Rebecca and Amber get to safety with Penrod and Ryder. But they have scars, physical and emotional.
It makes you think that even if you survive something awful like the siege of Khartoum, you're never really the same.
And that might be what we learn most from this. It's a story of survival, love, and family, but it also makes us think about colonialism, religious conflict, and how brutal war can be.
What a journey. It's amazing how a book can take you to another time and place, make you feel like you're living these characters' lives.
And remember, this is just one view of what happened. If you're interested, learn more, look at different accounts, maybe even question what this book tells us. History is complicated. There's always more to find out.
So true. Always more to learn, more to explore. And to you listening, thank you for picking this topic and joining us on this deep dive.
It was great to be your guide through all of this. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep sending us those deep dive requests.
We'll be here ready for whatever interesting topic you throw our way.